In the treacherous waters of the South Pacific, a lone fisherman is about to stumble upon a secret that could get him killed. When Mike Chen's boat is shattered by a monstrous storm, he thinks death in the crushing waves will be his fate. Instead, he washes up on an uncharted island that doesn't appear on any map, and for good reason. This remote paradise hides the largest criminal smuggling operation in the Pacific, moving billions in illegal cargo through a vast network of underground caves. They should have killed him when they had the chance. Because Mike Chen isn't just some helpless fisherman. He's a former Coast Guard rescue diver with 15 years of experience in maritime operations. What these criminals don't realize is that their perfect island fortress is about to be dismantled by the one man who knows their underwater caves better than they do. This is the story of how a shipwrecked sailor exposed a billion-dollar criminal empire armed with nothing but his wits and a lifetime of experience in the world's most dangerous waters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Consciousness returned to Mike Chen in waves, much like the gentle surf now lapping at his legs. His throat burned with salt water, lungs raw from the desperate fight for air during the storm. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on his face, forcing his swollen eyes to squint as they adjusted to the harsh tropical light. He lay there on the white sand, taking inventory of his injuries through years of trained experience. Ribs bruised but not broken, right ankle sprained, possibly from impact with the reef. Multiple lacerations across his arms and torso from being thrown against his boat's splintering hull. Nothing fatal, but every movement sent spikes of pain through his battered body. The beach around him was littered with debris from his vessel, fragments of the Lucky Dragon, his 30-foot fishing boat that had been his home for the past 5 years. A twisted piece of blue hull material caught his eye, bringing back flashes of the previous night's terror. The sudden drop in barometric pressure, the wall of black clouds appearing from nowhere, his radar failing as the storm cell engulfed him. The sickening crunch as hidden rocks tore through his hull. Mike forced himself to sit up, ignoring the protest from his muscles. The beach stretched in both directions, curving gently around what appeared to be a small bay. Behind him, dense jungle rose sharply into volcanic peaks shrouded in mist. The geography didn't match any of the charts he'd memorized during his years patrolling these waters with the Coast Guard. Something caught his attention. A glint of metal through the trees, too straight and regular to be natural. He squinted, trying to focus. For a moment he thought he saw movement, a dark figure watching from the tree line. When he looked again, it was gone. Survival training kicked in. He needed fresh water, shelter, and to salvage what he could from the wreckage. But as he began gathering floating debris from the surf, another detail nagged at him. The beach was pristine, too pristine. No plastic waste, no random debris that typically washed up on remote Pacific islands, almost as if it was regularly cleaned. A faint humming sound caught his attention, barely audible over the surf, mechanical, rhythmic, coming from somewhere inland. In 15 years of rescue operations, he'd visited dozens of remote islands. None had sounded like this. The sun climbed higher as Mike worked methodically, gathering what remained of his supplies. A waterproof bag with basic first aid supplies, parts of his emergency kit, a damaged handheld radio that sparked weakly when he tested it. His eyes kept being drawn back to the jungle, to that glimpse of metal he'd seen. Every instinct from his Coast Guard days told him something was wrong here. As if to confirm his suspicions, a deep bass thrum vibrated through the sand. Coming from underground, Mike froze, recognizing the sound of powerful generators, the kind used in large-scale operations, the kind that shouldn't exist on an unmapped island in the middle of nowhere. He was no longer alone on the beach. The figure he'd glimpsed earlier had returned, joined by others. They emerged from the tree line with practiced efficiency, weapons clearly visible at their sides. Not the simple tools of islanders, but modern tactical gear. Their leader approached with measured steps, a false smile fixed on his weathered face. "Welcome to our island, friend. You've had quite the adventure, haven't you? Let's get you somewhere more comfortable." The village looked exactly like what tourists imagined when they thought of a South Pacific paradise. Thatched roof buildings nestled among palm trees, colorful flowers spilling from handmade planters, fishing nets drying in the sun. Too perfect, Mike thought, like a movie set designed to match expectations. His escort, who had introduced himself simply as Marcus, led him through the settlement. Villagers watched their passage with carefully neutral expressions. Mike noted their clothing, new clean brand-name items that would cost a month's salary for real islanders. No children played in the streets, no elderly sat in doorways. Everyone was of working age. "Anna will get you sorted," Marcus said, stopping at a small shop near the village center. "She handles our guest accommodations." The pause was slight but noticeable. A woman appeared in the doorway, early 30s, with sharp features and alert eyes that didn't match her friendly smile. "Another lost soul," she said, her accent hinting at European education. "You're lucky we found you before the sun got to." "Hi," she gestured Mike inside, but her eyes flicked briefly to Marcus. Some unspoken message passed between them. The shop's interior was cool and dark, shelves stocked with basic supplies and tourist trinkets. Anna moved behind a counter worn smooth by years of use. "We don't get many visitors," she said, studying Mike with unsettling intensity. "The currents around the island are treacherous. Most sailors know to stay well clear. I didn't have much." "Joyce," Mike replied, watching her reaction. "Storm came out of nowhere, lost all electronics at once." Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, concern. "That happens here," she said carefully. "The volcanic peaks create unusual weather patterns, interfere with equipment." Her explanation was smooth, practiced, like everything else about this place. She pulled out a ledger, far too new for the weathered counter. "We'll need some information for our records." The questions were detailed: his full name, home port, vessel specifications, expected route. Mike gave modified versions of the truth, noting how she recorded everything in precise handwriting. "There's a small guest house behind the shop," Anna said when she finished. "You can stay there until we arrange transport to the mainland. A few days at most." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "We're quite isolated," she continued, leading him to the back door. "No phone service, no internet, but we have everything you need." She paused, hand on the doorknob. "One important rule. The jungle can be dangerous. Stick to the village. For your safety." The guest house was a single room with basic furniture. Through the window, Mike could see armed men patrolling the village perimeter. Their weapons were military-grade, their movements showing professional training. Anna lingered in the doorway. "Get some rest," she said. "Someone will bring food later." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "The walls here, they're quite thin. Remember that." With that cryptic warning, she left. Mike waited until her footsteps faded, then began a careful inspection of the room. He found what he expected: listening devices hidden in the lamp, a camera disguised as a smoke detector. The professional paranoia he'd developed in the Coast Guard had already identified 4 escape routes, catalogued potential weapons, mapped patrol patterns. Something was very wrong on this perfect island. The villagers' tense body language, the military-grade equipment poorly hidden beneath tropical casualness. The way Anna's warning could be taken 2 ways. Was she telling him he was being monitored, or giving him a way to communicate safely? Night fell quickly, as it does in the tropics. Through his window, Mike watched the village transform. The tourist-friendly facade faded as floodlights snapped on, illuminating the perimeter. Armed patrols increased, And somewhere in the distance, that persistent mechanical hum grew stronger. He lay on the narrow bed, appearing to sleep while his mind raced. Tomorrow he would begin mapping this place, understanding its rhythms, looking for weaknesses. Because one thing was certain, this wasn't a simple fishing village, and he hadn't washed up here by accident. Mike spent his first full day on the island, playing the role of grateful survivor, but his trained eyes caught every inconsistency. The village's power grid was far too sophisticated. Hidden cables running to concealed junction boxes, commercial grade, transformers disguised as storage sheds, solar panels that seemed decorative but tracked the sun with military precision. The villagers' routines were wrong too. No one fished, despite the dozens of boats moored in the small harbour. The crops in their traditional gardens were merely decorative, not food-producing. Yet the village never seemed to run short of supplies, despite no visible means of regular delivery. As dusk approached, he noticed another pattern. Groups of villagers would disappear into the jungle at regular intervals, always using the same hidden paths. They returned hours later, their clothes damp with an odd mineral smell like wet limestone. "Beautiful sunset, isn't it?" Anna's voice startled him. She had approached silently, a skill that didn't match her shopkeeper persona. "The clouds make quite a show when they hit the mountains." "Those aren't normal clouds," Mike replied, watching her reaction. The formation above the peaks was too regular, too consistent, industrial exhaust masked by the natural mist. Something shifted in Anna's expression. Approval. "You notice a lot for a simple fisherman." Her voice was carefully neutral. "Most visitors are too overwhelmed by our primitive charm to see much else." Before Mike could respond, a new sound cut through the evening air. The distinctive whine of high-performance engines. A sleek speedboat entered the harbour, far too modern for this supposedly simple village. Men in tactical gear quickly unloaded large crates, disappearing into a warehouse that had suspiciously thick walls. "Just supplies," Anna said smoothly. "We may be primitive, but we do enjoy some modern comforts, like the satellite uplink disguised as a water tower." Mike kept his tone casual. "Or the military-grade radar array hidden in the peak." This time, Anna's mask cracked slightly. Fear flickered across her face before she controlled it. "You should be careful what you notice here," she whispered. "Some knowledge can be dangerous." A series of lights flashed from the mountain. Red, green, blue in sequence. The village's rhythm changed instantly. Armed men emerged from hidden positions. The warehouse doors opened, revealing the glow of sophisticated electronics. "You should get inside," Anna said, her tone making it an order. "The nights here can be unpredictable." Mike retreated to his room, but positioned himself to watch through the window. Over the next hours, he documented everything: guard rotations, camera blind spots, communication patterns. His Coast Guard training helped him spot the telltale signs of a major operation struggling to stay hidden. At midnight, the true purpose of the warehouse became clear. A section of the harbour floor slid open, revealing a submersible dock. Modern cargo submarines, the kind favoured by international smuggling operations, surfaced silently. Mike photographed everything with the tiny camera he'd salvaged from his emergency kit, though he knew the images alone weren't enough. He needed to find the heart of this operation, understand its full scope, because this wasn't just a smuggling outpost. The level of sophistication, the military precision, the underwater infrastructure. This was something much bigger. As he finally lay down to sleep, a new sound joined the endless mechanical hum, screams, quickly muffled from somewhere deep beneath the village. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. They were hiding something much darker in those caves. Mike waited until the pre-dawn hours, when guard rotations were at their weakest. He'd spent 3 days memorizing patrol patterns, noting how the guards grew complacent in these quiet morning moments. Using techniques honed during Coast Guard stealth operations, He slipped past the perimeter, following one of the hidden paths into the jungle. The trail was well worn but carefully concealed, switching back through dense vegetation. The mineral smell grew stronger as he climbed. 30 minutes in, he found the first ventilation shaft, professionally disguised as a natural rock formation. Cool air flowed from its depths, carrying that same limestone scent. A sudden voice ahead made him freeze. 2 guards passed nearby, their conversation carrying clearly in the still air. "Big shipment tonight. Boss wants everything cleared before the satellite pass." "What about the new product, the live cargo?" "Lower levels. Don't ask questions if you want to keep breathing." Mike's blood ran cold. Live cargo. Human trafficking. The pieces were falling into place. The sophisticated submarine dock, the military-grade security, the screams in the night. He waited until the guards passed, then continued upward. The path ended at what appeared to be a solid rock face, but his trained eye spotted the seams of a concealed door. Years of maritime rescue had taught him to read air currents. A steady flow emerged from gaps in the rock, a large cavity behind. The door's control panel was disguised as a moss-covered stone. Mike studied it without touching, noting the professional installation. These weren't amateur criminals. This was a sophisticated operation with serious backing. A distant rumble made him look up. One of the clouds above the peak was moving against the wind, industrial exhaust just as he'd suspected. But its volume suggested massive underground facilities. The sound of approaching voices forced him into the underbrush. A group of men emerged from the hidden door, escorting someone. A young woman, bound and drugged, followed by 2 more captives. Mike's fists clenched as he documented everything with his concealed camera. Human trafficking wasn't just part of their operation, it was a major component. Once they passed, he approached the door again. The lock was fingerprint activated, but Coast Guard ops had taught him about biometric vulnerabilities. Using supplies from his emergency kit, he lifted a print from the control panel. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss. The tunnel beyond was a shock. Modern, well-lit, with industrial-grade ventilation. Cameras covered most angles, but Mike spotted the blind spots instantly. He moved carefully, using his maritime navigation skills to build a mental map as he went. The tunnel opened into a massive cavern that stole his breath. Multiple levels of sophisticated infrastructure had been built into the natural cave system. Loading docks, storage areas, and what was clearly a high-tech communications center. But it was the lowest level that made his stomach turn. Cells. Dozens of them. Some holding shipping containers that probably contained contraband. Others clearly designed for human captives. This wasn't just a smuggling operation. It was a full-scale criminal logistics hub. A sudden alarm shattered the cavern's rhythm. Not for him. His presence was still undetected, but the sound triggered an immediate response. Armed men rushed to predetermined positions. Through a massive cave mouth, Mike glimpsed the harbor entrance sliding open. A submarine was surfacing. He'd seen enough. Any more time here risked discovery. Mike retreated carefully, documenting everything he could. But as he neared the exit, a sound stopped him cold. Children's voices crying in multiple languages, the big shipment the guards mentioned. It was coming tonight. And it wasn't just cargo. They were trafficking children through this facility. Mike's jaw clenched. Evidence wasn't enough anymore. He needed to find a way to shut this operation down. Mike's return to the village was timed perfectly between guard shifts, but something had changed. The casual facade had hardened. More armed men, tighter security patterns. They knew someone had been in the caves. He slipped back into his room. Through the window he'd deliberately left unlatched, heart pounding. The evidence in his hidden camera could bring down this entire operation. But first, he needed to find a way off this island. Looking for these Anna's voice came from the shadows. She sat in the room's single chair, holding his salvaged emergency flares. Her shopkeeper's mask was gone, replaced by something harder, more professional. "You're good, very good, but we've been doing this a long time." "Coast Guard," she continued, studying him. "I suspected from the way you moved, how you read the currents. Regular fishermen don't spot surveillance equipment or map patrol patterns." She placed the flares on the table. "The question is, what do we do with you now?" "You could let me leave," Mike suggested, calculating angles, escape routes, weapons within reach. Anna's laugh was bitter. "No one leaves. Not really. This island, it owns you once you know its secrets." She stood, moving with the fluid grace of someone combat-trained. "But you've seen more than most. The caves, the shipments, the children." Mike tensed, ready for attack, but Anna raised her hands. "I'm not here to kill you. If I was, you'd be dead already." She moved to the window, checking outside. "But others will be. Soon. Marcus isn't as nuanced in his problem-solving." A commotion outside drew their attention. A fishing boat was approaching the harbour, similar to Mike's, probably another accidental arrival, but this one was met with immediate suspicion. Armed men swarmed the vessel. "Third one this month," Anna said quietly. "They're getting desperate. For new routes, more product, more shipments, more risks." She turned back to Mike. "The children that's new. Some of us drew the line there." The pieces clicked. "You're not just security, you're undercover." "Was," she corrected, "until they started checking backgrounds more thoroughly. Now I'm trapped here like everyone else. The only communication allowed is through their monitored channels. Every boat is controlled, every aircraft tracked." As if to emphasize her point, the distant sound of rotors approached. A sleek helicopter emerged from the mountain mist, bristling with scanning equipment. It circled the island slowly, sweeping for unauthorized signals. "They have radar coverage for 100 miles, Anna continued. "Sonar nets in the deep channels, satellite monitoring. The submarines are our only regular connection to the mainland, and they're—" She paused, choosing her words. "They're not an escape option." Mike thought of the cells he'd seen. "The human cargo." She nodded grimly. "The submarines are designed for one-way transport. The return trip is less crowded." Her meaning was clear. Anyone trying to stow away would find themselves in a watery grave. A sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. Marcus's voice carried through. "Room check, open up." Anna moved instantly, her training showing. She messed up her hair, unbuttoned her top slightly, turned to the door with a convincing giggle. "Just a minute." She gave Mike a hard look. "Play. Along or die." The room check was tense but quick. Marcus found exactly what he expected, the pretty shopkeeper entertaining their guest. But his eyes lingered on certain details. Professional assessment beneath casual appearance. After he left, Anna straightened her clothing efficiently. "They'll be watching more closely now. The cave breach has them spooked." She moved to the door, then hesitated. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. This place has broken better people than us." Mike waited until her footsteps faded, then retrieved his hidden camera. The island's defenses were formidable, but 15 years of Coast Guard operations had taught him something crucial. No security was perfect. Every fortress had a weakness. He just had to find it before they found him. Through his window, he watched the new fishing boat being escorted to dock. Its crew would soon learn the island's dark secret, and if they weren't useful to the operation, Mike pushed the thought away. He had to focus on finding a way out, because now he carried an even heavier burden. He might be the only hope those trafficked children had. The ventilation shaft was barely wide enough for Mike's shoulders, cold metal pressing against his back as he descended. Years of maritime rescue operations had taught him to work in tight spaces, but this was pushing his limits. 40 feet down, The shaft opened into a maintenance tunnel. His first real break in mapping the cave system. He'd spent 3 days studying the maintenance schedules, noting how the skeleton crew worked between midnight and 4 a.m., now using the access codes he'd carefully memorized from watching the workers. He moved deeper into the facility's infrastructure. The first level was mostly storage, legitimate cargo mixed with contraband to maintain their cover, but it was the subtle details that told the real story. Temperature-controlled rooms for drugs, reinforced cells for human cargo, special ventilation systems to handle chemical weapons. This wasn't just a smuggling operation, it was a full-service criminal logistics hub. A voice echoed through the tunnels. Mike pressed himself into a shadow, his dark clothes blending with the cave walls. 2 technicians passed, their conversation echoing. New security protocols after the breach. Boss is paranoid, someone's mapped the lower levels. They sweep for cameras? 3 times, nothing. But someone's been here. Air pressure changes in Section C. Mike smiled grimly. They'd found his deliberate mistakes, the false trails he'd left, but not his real documentation, hidden in plain sight using techniques learned from Coast Guard intelligence operations. Movement caught his eye, a small figure darting between storage containers. Too small to be a worker. A boy, maybe 12, Filipino based on his features, one of the trafficking victims. The kid moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the layout. Mike followed carefully, noting how the boy used maintenance paths to avoid security. This wasn't his first time sneaking around. After several turns, the kid slipped through a narrow gap between containers. Mike waited, then followed. He found himself in a hidden space behind the storage area. The boy was there, along with 3 other children of various ages. They froze at his entrance, eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Mike whispered in the mix of languages he'd learned during rescue operations. "I'm not with them." He showed his empty hands, kept his posture non-threatening. The oldest girl, maybe 14, studied him with 2 old eyes. "You're the new one, from the storm." Her English was accented but clear. "Marina says you're different, that you watch things." Marina, that must be Anna's real name. "I'm trying to help," Mike said quietly. "But I need to understand this place, all of it." The children exchanged looks. The boy who'd led him here spoke up. "We know ways, small ways, places they don't look because we're just cargo." His voice was bitter on the last word. "Show me," Mike said. For the next hour, the children led him through a maze of hidden passages. Their small size let them access areas the guards never checked. They showed him maintenance shafts, ventilation ducts, storage spaces between walls. More importantly, they showed him how the facility really worked. "Big boats come through here," the oldest girl explained, pointing down a massive tunnel. "Submarines in the deep water, but there's another way, small way, where the coral reef breaks. They don't watch it because the currents are too dangerous." Mike's mind raced. A gap in their security, too risky for normal shipping, but potentially navigable with the right skills. Coast Guard training in reef operations might make it possible. A distant alarm made them all freeze. "Shift change," the boy whispered. "We have to go, but come tomorrow. We show you more." As the children disappeared into their hidden paths, Mike quickly documented everything they'd shown him. The facility's weaknesses were becoming clear, but more importantly, he'd found allies, ones the smugglers had made the mistake of considering mere cargo. Back in his room, Mike added the new information to his mental map. The facility's sophistication was staggering, multiple levels, redundant, systems, professional security. But now he had something they didn't expect, the hidden knowledge of those they had imprisoned. Sometimes, he reflected, the biggest threats come from those you don't even consider worth watching. The morning briefing was Marcus's idea of establishing control. Every guest on the island was required to attend, sitting through his carefully scripted updates about supply shipments and maintenance work. But today was different. The room was tense, extra guards positioned at key points. "We've had some security concerns," Marcus announced, his casual tone contrasting with his rigid posture. "Until further notice, all residents will need updated access cards. For your safety, of course." Mike watched the reactions around the room. Most showed fear, a few resignation, but some, the ones in key positions, displayed the subtle tells of professional operators, a slight shift in stance, hands positioned for quick access to hidden weapons, eyes marking exits. These weren't random criminals, they were trained personnel. Anna sat nearby, playing her role perfectly. But Mike caught her slight nod toward a man in the corner. Tall, distinguished, wearing an expensive watch that marked him as someone important. The way others deferred to him subtly marked him as management, not muscle. After the briefing, Mike purposefully wandered the village, noting how information flowed. The hierarchy was becoming clear. Marcus handled security, but he answered to the man with the watch, Dr. Werner, he heard him called. Above them was someone only referred to as the director, never seen but whose orders carried absolute authority. "Quite a setup, isn't it?" The voice startled him. The speaker was an older man, tending to the fake garden plots. His hands were soft, not a real farmer. Everybody watching everybody else. Very efficient. His accent was educated British, incongruous with his workman's clothes. "I'm James," the man continued, deadheading flowers with scientific precision. "Village botanist officially, though there's not much real botany happening here." He gave Mike a knowing look. "Like there's not much real fishing from our harbour." Mike measured his response carefully. "Seems like a lot of infrastructure for a small island." "Indeed." James worked methodically as he talked. "Did you know these plants are all carefully chosen? Non-fruiting varieties. Can't have seeds spreading, revealing what's really grown in the lower levels." His scientific detachment cracked slightly, though lately they're trafficking things far worse than drugs. A guard patrol approached. James smoothly shifted to lecturing about soil composition. Once they passed, his demeanor changed. "Tonight. Greenhouse 3, if you want to understand what you're really dealing with." The greenhouse meeting revealed a carefully organized resistance. James was a former botanical researcher, trapped here after discovering the facility's drug production operation. Others included a communications expert, a former ship's engineer, even one of Marcus's own security staff. All had discovered things they couldn't ignore. All now worked to gather intelligence. "The director visits monthly," the security guard explained, displaying surprising professionalism. "Always by helicopter, heavy security, but the real power is Dr. Werner. He runs the research division." "Research?" Mike asked. James's face darkened. "They're not just moving drugs anymore. They're developing new ones, testing them on the trafficking victims, the children." He stopped, composing himself. "The children are ideal test subjects, they say. Young organs, clean systems." The communications expert, Sarah, pulled out detailed notes. "We've mapped most of their operation. Submarines handle major shipments, smaller boats for local distribution. The helicopter brings VIP clients, government officials they've bought. The problem," the security guard continued, "is the fail-safes, multiple dead man switches. If anything happens to the leadership, if any unauthorized communications get out, if anyone tries to shut down the generators." He let the implications hang. "The entire facility is rigged," Sarah explained. "Cells flood automatically, evidence destroyed, witnesses eliminated. Very thorough." Mike absorbed the information, his Coast Guard training automatically analyzing. "Weak points. You said research division where?" "Lowest level," James replied. "Highly restricted. That's where—" He paused. "That's where the screams come from." A sudden noise outside scattered them to predetermined hiding spots. Mike waited until the patrol passed, then retrieved his hidden camera. The scope of the operation was staggering. Professional security, government corruption, sophisticated infrastructure, but every complex system had vulnerabilities. Back in his room, Mike updated his mental map. The facility operated on multiple levels, both physical and organizational, but now he had names, faces, procedures. More importantly, he had allies with inside knowledge. The children had shown him the facility's physical weaknesses. Now he understood its organizational ones. But the stakes were even higher than he'd imagined. This wasn't just a smuggling operation to be exposed. If he didn't find a way to shut it down, more children would die in those underground labs. A new sound caught his attention, helicopter rotors approaching. Through his window, he watched the sleek aircraft descend. A man in an expensive suit emerged, surrounded by security. Dr. Werner receiving another VIP client. Another piece of the puzzle, another potential weakness to exploit. But time was running out. He'd seen too much, learned too much. Sooner or later, they'd realize what he was doing. And when that happened, he needed to be ready to move. Because on this island, mistakes didn't just get you killed, they got everyone who helped you killed too. The knock on Mike's door came at precisely 2 a.m. Anna slipped inside without waiting for a response, her movements urgent. "We have a problem, a big one." She crossed to his window, checking sightlines before speaking. "My handler's gone dark. 3 missed check-ins, that never happens." Her calm facade cracked slightly. "And there's more. Dr. Werner's been asking questions about you. Specific questions." Mike tensed. "What kind of questions?" "About your Coast Guard service. Dates, locations, missions." She met his eyes. "They're running deep background checks. It won't take them long to realize some of your cover story doesn't add up." A distant door slammed. Both froze, listening intently. Footsteps passed, then faded. "There's something else," Anna continued, her voice barely a whisper. "The children you've been meeting, one of them disappeared yesterday. The Filipino boy." Her meaning was clear. Someone had talked. Mike's mind raced through scenarios. "The other kids?" "Moved. Lower levels." Anna's expression hardened. "They're accelerating their testing program. Whatever they're developing down. They're close to a breakthrough. The facility's night sounds suddenly changed, a shift in the generator's hum, a different pattern of guard movements." Anna noticed, too. Her hand moved to a concealed weapon. "Marcus is calling an unscheduled security meeting," she said. "That only happens when—" She stopped as heavy footsteps approached. Mike moved instantly, years of training taking over. He pulled Anna close, messing her hair, making it look like an intimate moment. The door burst open a second later. Marcus stood there, flanked by armed guards. His casual manner was gone, replaced by cold professionalism. "Well, isn't this cozy?" His eyes took in every detail of the room. "Anna, darling, Dr. Werner needs you, now." The implied threat was clear. Anna squeezed Mike's arm, a warning, a goodbye, before leaving. Marcus lingered, his gaze predatory. "You know what I love about this island?" he said conversationally. "How it reveals people's true nature. Push them hard enough, they all break." He smiled without warmth. "Even dedicated federal agents." Mike kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. Was Marcus fishing, or did he know about Anna? "Funny thing about your Coast Guard record," Marcus continued. "Some parts are very detailed, others surprisingly vague." He moved closer, almost like someone with intelligence experience created it. An alarm blared from the direction of the caves. Marcus's radio crackled. "Sir, breach in Section D. The test subjects contain it," Marcus snapped. He gave Mike a final, calculating look. "Don't go anywhere, we're not finished." The moment he left, Mike moved. He had minutes at most before they locked everything down. The hidden camera and his most damaging evidence went into a waterproof pouch. The rest he scattered, partial information that would take time to piece together. He was checking his escape route when the door opened again. Anna stood there, but something was wrong. Her posture was different, her eyes hard. "Step away from the window," she said quietly. "Hands where I can see them." "Marina," Mike used her real name. "Whatever they told you, shut up." Her voice was ice. 3 years. 3 years I've been under, building my cover. Then you show up, start asking questions, meeting contacts. Now my entire network is compromised. Understanding hit like a physical blow. You think I'm the leak. The timing fits. My handler goes dark right after you start exploring the caves. The boy disappears after talking to you. She raised her weapon. "On your knees." Mike complied slowly. "Think it through. Why would I expose the children if I was working for them? Why document their operation?" "Because that's what deep cover operators do. Build trust, gather intelligence, identify threats." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Like I used to." "Check my evidence," Mike said calmly. "Really check it. You know what a professional operation looks like. Look at my work and tell me I'm with them." For a moment, doubt flickered in her eyes. Then new alarms sounded, closer, more urgent. "They're coming," she said. "If you're playing me, I'm not." Mike met her gaze steadily. "But right now, those kids need help. Whatever else you believe, that's real." Anna's internal struggle was visible. Years of training warring with instinct. Finally, she lowered the weapon. "If you're lying, I'll kill you myself." "Fair enough." Mike stood carefully. "But first, we need to—" The wall exploded inward. Through the dust and debris, armed figures emerged. Not facility security. These moved with military precision. At their head was James, the botanist, but gone was his scholarly demeanor. He moved like a trained operator. "FBI," he snapped. "Both of you, on the ground, now." The next hour was a blur of encrypted communications and tactical planning. James, actually Special Agent James Morrison, had been running a parallel FBI operation for months. His team had arrived on a stealth boat through the reef passage. The children had revealed 3 agencies, all working the same target, Mike said, shaking his head. "No wonder security's been twitchy." They were in a hidden command post James had established in an abandoned maintenance tunnel. Anna, now confirmed as DEA, was coordinating with her newly resurfaced handler through a secure satellite link. "We've got another problem," James announced, studying surveillance feeds. "Dr. Werner's accelerated his timetable. They're moving the test subjects tonight. Submarines are being prepped." "We're not ready," Anna protested. "The evidence isn't complete. Without documentation of the research program, then we get it now." Mike pulled up the facility maps the children had helped him create. "Werner's lab is here, lowest level, heavy security, but..." "But what?" James asked. "The kids showed me. Something. A maintenance shaft runs behind the lab, designed for accessing environmental controls." Mike traced the route. "It's tight, barely wide enough to crawl through. They don't guard it because no adult could fit." He paused. "Except maybe someone with confined space rescue training." Anna caught on immediately. "The shaft would bypass their main security, get you behind their surveillance network. Too risky," James argued. "If you're caught, those kids die," Mike cut him off. "Or worse, they disappear into some other facility. We might never get another chance." A burst of static from the radio interrupted them. One of James's surveillance teams reported increased activity at the submarine dock. They were running out of time. "I'm going," Mike said with finality. "Anna covers my exit through the north corridor. James keeps their security focused on the perimeter." He checked his borrowed equipment, camera, encrypted radio, lock-breaking tools. Anna grabbed his arm. "When you reach the lab, look for a red logbook. Werner's obsessive about his research notes. Everything will be documented. The maintenance shaft was worse than Mike had imagined. Pitch black, barely 18 inches wide, with pipes and conduits reducing the space further. Every movement had to be carefully planned. A wrong twist could leave him stuck, a trapped target. 40 minutes of grueling crawling brought him to the lab's access panel. Voices filtered through. Werner and his team preparing to move their operation. Mike activated his camera, documenting everything. Subjects respond well to the new compound, Werner was saying. Particularly the younger ones. Their systems adapt more quickly. And the failures? Acceptable losses. The successful subjects prove the concept. Our buyers will be pleased. Mike's jaw clenched as he photographed through the vent slats. The lab was a nightmare of medical equipment and restraint systems. Children's personal belongings were piled in one corner. Evidence of lives interrupted. Families destroyed. The red logbook sat on Werner's desk, maddeningly out of reach. But there was something else. A laptop, syncing data. Its screen reflected in a glass cabinet showing file names. Mike photographed everything, his Coast Guard training helping him remain silent despite his rage. A new voice crackled over the lab's intercom. Dr. Werner, Submarine 2 is ready for loading. Excellent. Begin transfer of the primary subjects. Terminate the rest. We can't leave evidence. Mike's blood ran cold. Through the vent, he watched guards begin moving children from holding cells. Some were unconscious, others drugged into compliance. Each was carefully logged in Werner's book. He had to move. The evidence was clear, the crime documented. But as he began retreating, his elbow hit a pipe. The small sound seemed to echo forever. Werner's. Ed snapped up. Check that vent. Mike moved fast, ignoring the risk of noise. Behind him, he heard the access panel being opened. A burst of gunfire followed him through the shaft. Security breach! Werner's voice echoed through the facility. Lock down all levels! Mike's radio crackled. They're moving! Anna's voice was urgent. Northern corridor is hot. Repeat, northern corridor is compromised. South route, James cut in. We'll create a distraction at the main entrance. Mike emerged from the shaft into chaos. Alarms blared. Armed men ran past his position. But he had what they needed. Proof of Werner's operation. Documentation of their crimes. Now he just had to survive long enough to use it. The morning after the lab incident, Mike found himself summoned to a meeting he'd never expected to attend. Dr. Werner's private office was a study in calculated intimidation. Surgical implements displayed like artwork, security feeds showing every corner of the facility, and a wall of academic credentials that seemed both impressive and somehow wrong. Your background is fascinating, Mr. Chen, Werner said, examining a file. Coast Guard search and rescue, advanced diving certifications, experience with submarine operations. He looked up, eyes cold and analytical. Exactly the skills we find. Ourselves suddenly needing. Mike kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. Had they discovered his infiltration of the lab? But Werner's next words took an unexpected turn. We lost 3 men in last night's incident. Security breach in the lower levels. Flooding in several sections. He closed the file. I find myself short-staffed at a critical moment. Marcus speaks highly of your capabilities. It was a trap, had to be, but refusing would be even more suspicious. I'm not sure what you're offering, Mike said carefully. A position, better quarters, significantly better pay. Werner stood, moving to a wall of monitors. We're expanding our operation. The research program has exceeded expectations, and our buyers are eager for increased production. The monitors showed submarine loading operations, clinical data, financial projections. Mike memorized everything while maintaining his facade of casual interest. Of course, Werner continued, this level of access requires certain commitments, demonstrations of loyalty. A door opened. Marcus entered, dragging a bound man who Mike recognized, one of the facility's maintenance workers. The man's face was bruised, his eyes wild with fear. This individual was caught attempting to access restricted communications equipment, Werner said clinically. Protocol dictates immediate termination. However, I believe in making such moments educational. He offered Mike a handgun. Consider it your job interview. Mike's mind raced. Refusing meant blowing his cover, dooming not just himself, but Anna, James, and their operation. But executing a prisoner. The maintenance worker caught his eye, gave a tiny nod. Understanding hit like lightning. This was another undercover operative, sacrificing himself to get Mike deeper inside. Mike took the gun. Years of training helped him hide his revulsion as he raised the weapon. The worker closed his eyes. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Excellent, Werner said as Marcus dragged the body away. Clean, professional. Welcome to the inner circle. He pressed. A button and a hidden door opened. Shall we begin your orientation? The next hours were a nightmare of forced complicity. Werner proudly showed him the full scope of their operation. Drug production facilities, human trafficking processing centers, weapons storage. Mike documented everything mentally while playing the role of an eager recruit. Your first assignment, Werner announced, leading him to a high-tech security room. Supervising tonight's submarine launch, 40 million in product, plus our latest batch of test subjects. The buyers are particularly interested in the younger ones. Mike studied the launch protocols, noting weaknesses. Impressive setup, multiple redundancies. Necessary precautions. We've had interference lately, competing organizations, law enforcement. Werner's smile turned predatory. But we adapt. Speaking of which, I believe you know Anna rather well. Mike's heart stopped, but his voice remained steady. The shop owner, we've talked. Indeed. Werner pulled up a surveillance photo, Mike and Anna during one of their covert meetings. You should know that fraternization between security levels is discouraged, creates potential conflicts of interest. The threat was clear. Mike forced a look of understanding. Won't happen again, sir. See that it doesn't. Loyalty is everything here. Werner turned back to the monitors. Now, about tonight's launch. As Mike absorbed the operational details, his hidden camera captured everything. But the weight of the gun felt like lead in his holster, a reminder of the moral compromises required to maintain his cover. How many more lines would he have to cross, and would crossing them make him any different from the criminals he was fighting? The answer came from an unexpected source. As he left Werner's office, he passed the medical bay. Through the window, he saw the children, strapped to beds, being prepared for transport. Their eyes met his, filled with recognition and desperate hope. No, he realized. Whatever it took, whatever lines he had to cross, he wasn't like Werner. Because Werner saw those kids as products. Mike saw them as lives to save. And tonight's submarine launch might be their last chance. The submarine's sonar picked up the approaching vessel first. Mike stood in the control center, watching the blip move closer to the island's security perimeter. Something about its approach pattern seemed familiar. Too familiar. Coast Guard. Cutter, Marcus announced, studying the readings. Running dark, minimal crew. They're trying to be subtle. He laughed coldly. Amateur hour. But Mike recognized the vessel's movements. Standard Coast Guard infiltration pattern, designed to look amateurish while gathering intel. He'd trained crews to do exactly this, which meant Dr. Werner wants. All non-essential personnel confined to quarters, Marcus continued. Security teams on full alert. And Chen, he fixed Mike with a hard stare. You're with me on the dock. Time to prove your loyalty again. The facility shifted into high alert. Guards doubled at key positions. Werner's research staff accelerated their preparations, moving equipment and test subjects to secure areas. Through it all, Mike noticed Anna and James carefully positioning their people, preparing for whatever was coming. A new complication arrived by helicopter. A group of expensively dressed men, clearly buyers for Werner's products. Mike overheard fragments of their conversation as he patrolled the dock. The Chinese group is particularly interested in the younger subjects. Their tolerance for the new compound exceeds expectations. What about the American senator? His payment cleared? Full deniability arranged. The offshore accounts are... The conversation cut off as they entered the lower levels. But Mike's hidden camera had caught everything. More evidence, more names to add to the case, if they survived to use it. The facility's power suddenly fluctuated. Emergency generators kicked in smoothly. But something had changed. The security. Systems flickered for just a moment, long enough for Mike to spot Anna slipping through a normally locked door, James's team moving into new positions. They were making their move. Too soon. The Coast Guard's arrival must have forced their hand. "Chen!" Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. "Check the western generators, now!" Mike moved quickly through the facility's corridors, noting how the guard patterns had shifted. They were exposed. If he didn't warn Anna and James, a splash of color caught his eye. A child's drawing dropped in a hallway. One of Werner's. On test subjects being moved to the submarines. Time was running out for them too. The western generator room was empty when he arrived. But a familiar voice spoke from the shadows. "You should have stayed topside." Marcus emerged, weapon raised. "Might have lived longer. How long have you known?" Mike kept his voice calm, mind racing through options. "That you're not one of us? Since the beginning." Marcus moved closer. "The question is, who are you really? FBI? CIA? Or..." His smile turned predatory. "Coast Guard intelligence, perhaps?" The generator's hum changed pitch. Someone was tampering. "With the power grid. Part of James's plan. Doesn't matter," Marcus continued. "Werner's buyers are here. The shipment leaves tonight, and any evidence you've gathered dies with you." Mike tensed, preparing to move. But a new sound froze them both, boots on metal approaching fast. A child's voice called out in terror. Marcus's head turned slightly toward the sound. That microscopic distraction was all Mike needed. The fight was brief, but brutal. Marcus was good, professionally trained, but Mike had spent 15 years conducting rescue operations in volatile conditions. Every movement was calculated, efficient, aimed at incapacitation. Marcus went down hard. Mike secured him quickly, then moved toward the voices. He found 2 guards dragging a struggling child, one of his young informants. The guards never saw him coming. Moments later, the child was safe, the guards unconscious. But the facility's rhythm had changed. Alarms blared in new patterns. Through his earpiece, he heard Anna's voice, tense with urgency. "They're moving everything. Now." "Werner's not waiting for full dark." "James here. My team's in position, but if they get those submarines loaded, they won't." Mike keyed his radio. "But we're blown. No more time for subtlety." He looked down at the child, who stared back with trusting eyes. "Find the others. Use the hidden paths. Get them to the surface." As the child disappeared into the facility's secret network of passages, Mike retrieved his hidden camera. The evidence was damning. Werner's research, the buyers' identities, government conspirators. But none of it would matter if they didn't. "Stop those submarines!" His radio crackled again. Anna's voice was grim. "Mike, we've got another problem, a big one." Through the generator room's viewport, he saw what she meant. The Coast Guard cutter had been joined by 2 more shadows on the horizon. But they weren't rescue ships. They were attack submarines, Chinese military. Werner wasn't just selling drugs and test subjects. He was selling American secrets. And his buyers were here to collect. Everything fell apart in a matter of minutes. Mike was making his way back through the facility's lower levels when the first explosion rocked the foundations. Not an attack. This came from inside. Someone had detonated charges in the structural. "Supports! James!" Mike shouted into his radio. "What's happening?" Static answered, all frequencies dead. Through the emergency lighting, he saw water beginning to seep through the walls. Someone was trying to sink the facility. He rounded a corner and froze. James stood there, calmly inputting commands into a control panel. Around him, his supposed FBI team was methodically placing more charges. "I really am sorry about this," James said without looking up. "You've been incredibly helpful, documenting everything so thoroughly, getting us access to restricted areas." He finally turned, his scholarly demeanor replaced by cold professionalism. "Making sure all the evidence points to a federal operation gone wrong. The truth hit like a physical blow. You're not FBI." "Oh, I was. 20 years." James smiled thinly. "Until I realized there was more money on this side. Werner's operation is impressive, but limited. Small scale, with the right leverage, the right evidence." He gestured at Mike's hidden camera. "We can take it international." More explosions echoed through the facility. Mike heard screams from the direction of the holding cells. "The children, unfortunate but necessary, can't leave witnesses." James checked his watch. "The Chinese buyers will blame America for the loss of their investment. Werner's organization will collapse, and in the chaos, a new operation will emerge, one with very detailed intelligence about federal investigation methods." Mike tensed to move, but James's team had him covered, professional operators, watching for any sign of resistance. "The submarines are gone," James continued, "taking Werner and his research to a new facility, one I've spent years preparing. The evidence you've gathered will show a tragic accident during a botched federal raid. So many agencies involved, the investigation will take years to sort out." Water was ankle-deep now, rising fast. James held out his hand. "The camera, please. You've done excellent work, but it's time to clean up loose ends." Mike's mind raced. Where was Anna? The children? Had James betrayed them too? A new sound cut through the chaos, the facility's intercom, crackling with static. A child's voice, speaking in rapid Filipino. To most, it would sound like panic, but Mike recognized the code he'd taught them. Eastern Passage clear, submarines gone, Anna hurt but alive, waiting at rally point. James frowned at the announcement. "What?" Mike moved. His apparent surrender became a surge forward. Salt water sprayed as he dove, years of Coast Guard close combat training taking over. James was good, but Mike had trained to fight in exactly these conditions. The first guard went down hard. The second got off a shot that grazed Mike's shoulder before a precise strike dropped him. James himself proved surprisingly skilled, but Mike had one advantage. He knew what the rising water would do to their footing. The fight was brutal but brief. When it ended, Mike stood over James's unconscious form, water now knee-deep. The facility was dying, taking its secrets with it, but the evidence in his camera might still save lives. He keyed his backup radio, hoping the children were monitoring the emergency frequency he'd shown them. "Rally point 5 minutes," Static answered, but he had to believe they heard. Had to believe Anna was still alive, still fighting. Because James's betrayal hadn't just exposed a deeper conspiracy, it had started a countdown. Soon, the Chinese would realize they'd been double-crossed. Their submarines would return, looking for revenge, and when they did, they'd find something very different from what they expected. Because Mike wasn't just a Coast Guard veteran anymore. He was the only one who could expose the truth about what had happened on this island, if he survived the next 5 minutes. The rally point was chaos when Mike arrived. Water poured through multiple breaches, turning the once pristine facility into a maze of flooding corridors. Anna was there, bandaged but standing, coordinating the evacuation of Werner's test subjects. Through maintenance tunnels. "James?" she asked when she saw him. The look on his face answered her question. "I knew something was wrong when the charges went off. Those weren't FBI patterns." "He was building his own operation," Mike explained, quickly, "using us to eliminate the competition." He connected his hidden camera to the portable terminal they'd smuggled in, but he missed something bigger. The terminal's screen flickered to life, displaying the files he'd captured. Anna's eyes widened as she scrolled through Werner's. "Research data. This isn't just drug development," she breathed. "They're creating something else. Look at these molecular structures." Mike recognized the implications immediately. His Coast Guard intelligence training had included briefings on weapons of mass destruction. Binary agents. The drugs are just a cover. They're weaponizing the human trafficking operation. The test subjects, Anna realized. They're not measuring drug reactions. They're testing delivery systems, ways to turn human carriers into biological weapons. The facility shuddered as another explosion rocked the foundations. Through the chaos, Mike heard children crying. The survivors from Werner's labs huddled together, terrified but alive. Each one could have become a weapon, released into populated areas without knowing what they carried. "It gets worse," Mike said, pulling up the surveillance footage from the buyer's arrival. "Those Chinese submarines? They're not here for drugs. Look at their markings." Anna studied the images. Military, intelligence. They're not buyers. They're here to steal the research. And now they think they've been betrayed. Mike checked his watch. When those subs return, they won't be subtle. They'll flatten this island, eliminate all evidence. How long? Based on their last position, 20 minutes, maybe less. Small voice interrupted them, one of the Filipino children Mike had befriended. "There's another way," the boy said in careful English, "through the deep caves, where they test the swimming drugs." Mike and Anna exchanged looks. The facilities, underwater testing areas. Of course, they'd need deep water access to develop their delivery systems. "Show us," Mike said. The boy led them through flooding passages to a heavily reinforced door. Beyond it lay Werner's true testing facility, an elaborate network of underwater caves and pressure chambers. The infrastructure was cutting-edge, designed for developing weapons that could survive deep ocean deployment. "This isn't a small criminal operation," Anna said, examining the equipment. "This is state-level weapons research disguised as drug trafficking." "Perfect cover," Mike agreed. "Who investigates a smuggling ring for weapons of mass destruction?" The facility groaned as more structural supports failed. They had minutes at most before the whole complex flooded. But now they had something else, a way to prove what was really happening here. Mike's radio crackled, an encrypted channel using old Coast Guard frequencies. A familiar voice cut through the static. "This is Captain Sarah Chen, USS Hawthorne. Any Coast Guard personnel on this frequency, respond. Mike's sister, the one person who'd believe his incredible story, the one person who could get word to the right authorities before the Chinese submarines returned. Sarah, it's Mike. Authentication. Code Sierra 7 Delta. You're not going to believe what I've found." The truth about the island facility was darker than anyone had imagined, but now they had proof. Evidence of biological weapons development, human trafficking as weapons testing, international espionage hidden behind criminal enterprise. The only question was whether they could get that proof to the surface before the Chinese submarines returned to bury it forever. The barometric pressure was dropping fast. Mike felt it in his ears as they evacuated the last of the children through the underwater testing facility. Years of maritime experience told him what was coming. A storm system moving in. Massive. And hungry. "That's not natural," Anna said, checking weather radar on their portable terminal. "Look at the formation. It's moving against the prevailing winds." She was right. The storm that had initially wrecked Mike's boat had seemed strange too. Now he understood why. They're steering it, he realized. Those towers on the mountain peaks, they're not just radar arrays. They're weather modification systems. "Makes sense," Anna replied, helping a young girl through a narrow passage. "Perfect cover for a covert facility. Keep ships away. Discourage investigation." Mike's radio crackled. Sarah's voice was tense. "Mike, we've got multiple contacts. Chinese. Submarines. Returning on attack vectors. ETA 15 minutes. The facility shuddered as another section flooded. Through the reinforced windows of Werner's testing area, Mike watched underwater debris float past. The evidence they'd gathered was damning: biological weapons research, human experimentation, weather control technology. But none of it would matter if they didn't survive the next hour. The storm will work in our favor, he said, studying the cave system's layout. Those subs will have trouble targeting in heavy seas, and the weather modification system could be turned against them. Anna finished. She gestured to the bank of controls. Werner's research needed precise weather conditions. They must have some way to control it. The Filipino boy tugged at Mike's sleeve. "There's more," he said urgently. "In the deep room, where the bad doctor kept his special medicine." He led them to a sealed chamber deep in the testing complex. Inside, they found Werner's private lab and his contingency plan. Racks of capsules lined the walls, each containing engineered pathogens designed to be released by pressure changes. "Insurance policy," Anna breathed. "If the facility's compromised, these would contaminate the entire area. No one could investigate without a full biohazard team. And if Chinese missiles hit them," Mike didn't finish the thought, "the resulting pandemic could devastate the entire Pacific region." Sarah's voice cut in again. "Storms intensifying, wave height increasing, but those subs are still coming." Time was running out. They had the evidence, the surviving test subjects, and proof of an international conspiracy. But they also had a new problem. They couldn't just escape. They had to secure those bioweapons before the Chinese attack turned them into a weapon of mass destruction. Mike made his decision. "Anna, get the kids to the surface. Link up with Sarah's team." He checked his diving gear. "I'm going to the weather control center." "That's suicide," she protested. "The upper levels are completely flooded. Someone has to redirect that storm, turn their own weapon against them." He handed her his camera. "Get this evidence out. Make sure everyone knows what really happened here." The facility groaned as storm-driven waves battered its weakening structure. They could hear the thunder even through hundreds of feet of rock. "You've got 10 minutes, Anna said finally. "Then we trigger the facility's scuttling charges, sink everything before those subs can strike." Mike nodded grimly. 10 minutes to swim through flooding corridors, reach the control center, and turn a weather control system he barely understood into a weapon. All while Chinese submarines moved into attack position. The storm above howled like a living thing, manipulated by technology he'd never knew existed. But storms were his element. He'd spent his career fighting them, predicting them, surviving them. Now he just had to learn to control one. The facility shuddered again as he prepared to dive. The children were already moving through their escape route, led by Anna. His radio crackled one last time, Sarah's voice, professional but concerned. "Good luck, little brother. Try not to die." Mike smiled grimly as he checked his oxygen supply. "Some storms you ran from, others you had to ride out. This one he was going to steal." The flooded corridors were a maze of darkness and deadly currents. Mike pushed through them, using every skill he'd learned in 15 years of rescue operations. His dive light revealed a nightmare landscape, floating debris, sparking electrical panels, and the occasional glimpse of things he tried not to look at too closely. Chinese submarines taking attack positions. Sarah's voice crackled through his underwater comm unit. 7 minutes to optimal firing range. Above him, the stolen storm raged. He could feel its power even through hundreds of feet of rock and seawater. The facility's structure groaned under the assault of wind-driven waves. "Anna here," another voice cut in. "Children secured in pressure chambers, ready for emergency ascent, but Mike—" She hesitated. "We found more of Werner's records. The weather control system. It's not just for steering storms." "What do you mean?" "It's a resonance weapon. They use the storms as cover to test it. That's why there are so many shipwrecks in this area. They weren't accidents." Mike processed this as he navigated another flooded junction. The implications were staggering. Weather control as a weapon of mass destruction disguised as natural disasters. His dive computer chirped a warning. He was running low on air. The control center seemed impossibly far away. A sudden current grabbed him, smashing him against a wall. Pain flared in his side, probably cracked ribs. But the impact had also dislodged a panel, revealing something unexpected. Found an emergency. Access shaft, he reported. Maintenance tunnel leading straight up. Don't use it! Anna's voice was urgent. Werner's files show... But Mike was already pulling himself into the vertical shaft. His light revealed rungs leading upward, towards the surface, towards the control center. Too late, he saw the warning signs, pressure seals, containment markings. This wasn't a maintenance shaft, it was a test chamber. The water around him began to vibrate. Through his comm unit, he heard Anna swearing. They're activating the resonance weapon. The whole chamber's going to... The world exploded. Mike felt himself thrown upward as the chamber's containment field activated. Water turned to steam in an instant. The pressure wave would have killed an ordinary diver, but Mike wasn't ordinary. Coast Guard rescue training had taught him how to ride out explosive decompressions, how to use pressure waves instead of fighting them. He shot upward through the facility's levels like a cork from a bottle. Pain lanced through every nerve as the pressure tried to tear him apart. But he maintained consciousness through sheer trained instinct. The journey that should have taken 20 minutes happened in 20 seconds. He erupted into the control center in a geyser of superheated steam, and found he wasn't alone. James stood at the main console, very much alive, entering final commands. Behind him, 2 Chinese military officers watched with professional interest. "Impressive," James said calmly. "You survived the test chamber, but then that's why we arranged for you to find this facility. We needed someone with your exact skills to prove the weapon's effectiveness." Mike's diving gear was ruined, his ribs screaming, but his mind was clear. "You planned this, my shipwreck, all of it. A proper weapons test requires proper test subjects." James gestured to the screens showing the approaching submarines. "Now we demonstrate the product to our buyers. Watch carefully. You're about to see why weather control will revolutionize modern warfare." The storm above had reached impossible intensity, but through his pain, Mike noticed something James hadn't. The resonance weapon had damaged the facility's structure. Cracks spread through the reinforced walls with each new thunderclap. His radio crackled. Anna's voice, barely audible. "Charges set. Ready on your mark." Mike checked his dive computers. Depth gauge, now functioning as an altimeter. The control center's position, the structural damage. Years of maritime rescue experience came together in a moment of perfect clarity. He knew exactly what would happen when the charges blew. Exactly how the pressure wave would travel. Exactly where to be when it hit. "You're right about one thing," he told James. "This is a weapons test." His hand found the emergency release for the control center's viewport. Alarms blared as the safety systems registered his intent. "But I'm the one conducting it." He pulled the lever, and the storm came in. The storm hit the control center like a living thing. Hurricane-force winds howled through the shattered viewport, turning loose equipment into deadly projectiles. The Chinese officers were thrown back instantly. James barely managed to grab onto the control console. But Mike was ready. His entire career had been spent fighting forces exactly like this. He moved with the wind, using its power rather than resisting it, making his way to the weather control systems. "You'll kill us all," James shouted over the chaos. "Those children you experimented on?" Mike's voice was cold as he input emergency commands. "They're already clear, but your submarines out there, they're about to learn what this weapon really does." The facility's structure was failing. Through the viewport he could see the storm reaching impossible intensity. The resonance weapon had turned it into something beyond natural, a vortex of pure destructive force. "Anna, "Status," he shouted into his radio. "Children secured in emergency." Idpodsy's surface teams standing by, but Mike... Static nearly drowned her next words. The bioweapons storage, the containment's failing. A new alarm joined the cacophony. Warning, biological containment breach. The facility's death throes were threatening to release Werner's engineered pathogens. "Sarah?" Mike called, fighting his way to the environmental controls. "Chinese submarines holding position," his sister reported. "They're preparing to launch." Mike's mind raced. The submarines had to be stopped, the bioweapons had to be contained, and the resonance weapon. The answer hit him with sudden clarity. The same technology that could control weather could also affect water pressure, temperature differentials, underwater currents. His fingers flew over the controls, reconfiguring the weapon's output. Years of maritime experience guiding every adjustment. The storm above wasn't the weapon, it was just the power source. "Anna, blow the charges. Now!" Multiple explosions rocked the facility, but Mike had calculated the pressure waves perfectly. As the structure began to collapse, he triggered the resonance weapon at exactly the right moment. The effect was catastrophic. The underwater pressure wave caught the Chinese submarines in a vice grip of rapidly shifting currents and temperature differentials. Their hulls groaned as the water itself seemed to turn against them. At the same time, the collapsing facility created a massive downward suction. Werner's bioweapon storage was pulled deeper, away from populated areas, into crushing depths that would destroy any surviving pathogens. "It's over," Mike said, watching the submarines retreat on the tracking screen. "Their weapons are neutralized. The evidence is secured. Time to..." James's attack caught him from behind. The former FBI agent was wounded but still dangerous. They fought desperately in the howling wind, each knowing only one would walk away. "You don't understand," James shouted, landing a solid blow. "The weapon isn't the storm, it's not the submarines, it's this entire facility, everything that happened. Here was a test." Mike absorbed the hit, his ribs screaming, but something in James's words caught his tactical mind. What test? How to weaponize an entire island, the drugs, the trafficking, the bioweapons, all of it designed to create perfect deniability. Natural disasters hiding deliberate attacks, criminal enterprises covering military operations. The truth hit Mike like a physical blow. This wasn't just about weapons or smuggling. It was a prototype for a new kind of warfare. Hiding attacks, behind layers of criminal activity and natural disasters. But James had made one critical mistake. He'd forgotten what Mike really was, not just a Coast Guard veteran, but a rescue specialist, someone trained to turn disasters against themselves. The next few seconds were a blur of violence. James was skilled, but Mike had spent his career fighting opponents far more powerful than any human. Storms, waves, the ocean itself. The same techniques that could redirect a current or ride out a pressure wave worked perfectly against a trained killer. When it ended, James lay unconscious. The storm above was dissipating, its unnatural power fading. Through his radio, Mike heard Sarah coordinating with surface vessels, Anna supervising the children's evacuation. He looked out through the shattered viewport. The sun was rising over a transformed seascape. The island's criminal facade had been blown away, revealing its true nature as a weapons testing facility. But more importantly, they'd proven such facilities could be detected and destroyed. "Facilities going down," Anna reported. "Final countdown initiated." Mike took one last look at the control center's screens. The Chinese submarines were in full retreat. The evidence was secured. The children were safe. "Copy that," he replied. "Let's finish this." The resonance weapon powered down for the last time, as emergency charges demolished its remaining components. Soon, the entire facility would collapse into the deep ocean trenches, taking its deadly secrets with it. But its most important secret was already out, the knowledge that someone was watching, Someone who could turn such weapons against their creators. Someone who understood that the greatest power wasn't in creating disasters, it was in surviving them. 3 days later, Mike stood on the deck of his sister's ship, watching the sunrise over a now quiet sea. The island had vanished beneath the waves, taking Werner's facility and its weapons with it. But its impact would be felt for years to come. The Chinese are denying everything, of course, Sarah said, joining him at the rail. But the evidence you recovered is undeniable. Weather control technology, weaponized disease research, human trafficking as weapons testing. And James, talking. A lot. She handed him a fresh coffee. Turns out he wasn't the only corrupt agent. This goes deep. Government officials, military contractors, international conspirators. Your evidence exposed an entire shadow war. The children had been rescued, all 27 of them. Already, international agencies were working to reunite them with their families. The Filipino boy who had helped them waved from the medical bay window. Mike waved back, knowing the kid would carry these scars forever, but at least he'd survived. Anna appeared on deck, looking strange in her formal DEA uniform. Just got word from headquarters. They're launching a global investigation, looking for other facilities like this one, places where natural disasters might be covering weapons tests. They'll find them, Mike said with certainty. Now that we know what to look for. The ocean's surface was calm now, showing no sign of the unnatural storm that had raged here. But underneath, in the deep trenches, the facility's ruins told a story of humanity's capacity for both evil and resistance. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "Brass is already talking medals, promotions. You could write your own ticket." Mike considered the horizon. The same horizon he'd watched for 15 years, conducting rescue operations, saving lives. The same horizon that had nearly killed him when this all began. "I'm going back to search and rescue," he said finally, "but with a new mission. Looking for more places like this. More weapons disguised as disasters. More people who need saving." Anna nodded in understanding. "The next facility will be better hidden. The next weapons more sophisticated." "Maybe," Mike agreed. "But now we know they're out there, and we know they can be beaten." The ship's engines hummed as they turned toward home. Behind them, the rising sun painted the sky in shades of hope. The ocean kept its secrets, as it always had. But now there were people watching, people who understood that sometimes the greatest battles weren't fought with weapons, but with the will to survive them. Mike touched the railing one last time, feeling the vibration of the ship, the pulse of the sea. The next storm was coming. Maybe natural, maybe not. But he would be ready. They all would, because some storms you ran from. Others you fought, and the rest you turned against themselves.